Okay, and we're live. Hi, everybody. I am here today with Beau Simensen, the creator of Sculpin and co-host of that podcast. Say hi, Beau.
Hello, everyone. How's it going?
So today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things. I want to start, though, with speaking, because that's kind of something that we cover a lot on No Capes, and something that you're pretty well versed in. So when did you start speaking? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's my first talk was at Symphony Live Portland. I think that was in 2013. That was my very first time presenting, and it was actually my second conference that I'd been to in like 15 years. I'd gone to Symphony Live in San Francisco in 2012, and kind of got to see what it was all about, and thought, wow, these people are all up talking. I thought it was really cool. And I met a person by the name of Jacob Mather, and he got up and did a lightning talk. And I kind of got to know him a little bit better. And I didn't find out until after the fact that that was the first time he'd ever spoken. He just decided randomly to go up and do a lightning talk. At least I'm pretty sure it was the first time he'd ever spoken. I thought, wow, how could someone just do that? And so then I thought, maybe I could do that. That fall, I was still living in North Dakota at the time. I wasn't really near any community people. There's no PHP user groups in North Dakota, for example. I think there's a couple of PHP developers in South Dakota. I don't know how many. I know of at least two, but none in North Dakota. So so I decided to start submitting to all these conferences, and I think I did 6 submissions, and I think I did maybe two or three talks each, and found out that I was going to get rejected by all of them. And all of them but Symphony Live had come back, and I was kind of sitting there thinking, maybe this speaking thing isn't for me. Why did I think anyone would possibly want to take a chance on me to speak about crazy things? And the next day I got the email that said I was going to get to go to Symphony Live, so it was pretty exciting. I got to talk about Embedded Composer, so I was super passionate about it, and I was really excited about it, and they're the only people who've ever picked up that talk. And it was pretty exciting. That was pretty much where I launched Sculpin as well. That's when I first really started talking about Sculpin, because Sculpin was based on Embedded Composer, or it used Embedded Composer. So yeah, that's how I started getting into it. And then it was another 6 months before I did another speaking thing. So that was, I guess, late 2013. I did a user group talk in Seattle, a user group talk in Madison, and then I got to speak at Madison PHP. So that was my next conference after that. And last year turned out to be pretty busy for speaking, which was pretty awesome. So I'm still pretty new to it, but yeah. So I remember when I started. It wasn't that long ago.
So you went from never having spoken to submitting, did you say 6?
Yeah. I hadn't submitted to any. I'd heard from a lot of people that your chances aren't very good at getting selected, period. And I think Lone Star PHP said that they had 400 talk submissions this year, and they could select 30 of them. So, I wasn't really paying attention to the numbers at the time, but I was listening to other people in the community who said, yeah, it's a good idea to submit, a lot of talks. Don't just submit one talk, and don't assume you're going to get selected. So submit to all of the places that you can, or all of the places that it's feasible for you to actually go to, because chances are you're not going to get selected at all of them. So yeah, I submitted to 6 conferences. I don't remember all of them. I think I did Confu, Symphony Live. I did Lone Star that year and got rejected, and PHP Tech, I think. So definitely those 5, but I think there was maybe 1 or 2 others that I submitted for as well.
Okay, and your first talk was on Embedded Composer.
Yep.
So can you remember back when you're going up on stage, were you nervous before that talk?
Yeah, I was. I found out that there's a lot of things that you don't realize until the first time you talk, or the first time you present at a new location. I had done some practicing beforehand. I presented in front of my wife and a couple of other people. Just did a couple of practice runs, and I thought it went really well. I thought my timing was pretty good. but I didn't realize that I was relying on looking at the screen to see what was actually on the screen at the time. And the first thing I did when I plugged into the projector was realize that Keynote shot up this presenter screen that I'd never seen before. And it freaked me out because all of a sudden I'm like, what is all of this? It's going to confuse me. And I think I ended up turning mirroring on because I had no idea how to use this presenter screen. But then I had the problem of I had a bad habit of looking at the screen, and I still have this habit, actually. Something that I've been actively trying to work on. But the screen was right behind me, so there was like no... it seemed like there was only like 2 feet between the edge of the stage and the screen. So I was like looking way up, and the mic had been clipped on me, so anytime I looked up at the screen, people couldn't hear me anymore because the mic had gone too far away. So I'd actually looked at the other speaker room, or the other room where the speakers were at, and had plugged everything in to make sure everything, was working. Like, I didn't plug it in, but I walked up on the stage just to see what it was going to be like. But then found out that the other stage was like way shallow. It didn't have such a deep stage. So basically everything that I did to try to prepare for the actual talk sort of fell apart at the last minute.
Okay, but you made it through.
Yeah,
You learned a bunch of stuff from it, so that's important.
Yeah, definitely.
I find that's a hard thing to not look up at the screen when you're talking is something I struggle with. When I spoke at Laracon EU, they actually had a TV like on the floor, or a monitor on the floor like in front of me that had the slides. So that was super helpful because I didn't have to look behind me; it was right in front of me.
Yeah, I got to speak at Paris this year for Forum PHP, and they had the same thing. But by that point, I was really used to my presenter screen and seeing the presenter screen, and there they were projecting the main slides. so I still had to. So I finally was like, oh, this would have been awesome if I could just look down there and not worry about looking behind me. But I still had to look at my laptop. So it was nice to see it, but it was, I don't know. Had that been how Symphony Live had been set up, it would have been awesome for me.
Right? Yeah. First-time speakers.
Yeah.
So according to your website, you've since that first embedded composer talk at Symphony Live given quite a few talks to user groups and different conferences. So after all those many talks, do you still get nervous?
Yeah, I do. I still get like last-minute nerves. Like, I don't feel like I'm super nervous even up to like 10 minutes beforehand. I feel, if anything, I'm stressed if I don't have all my slides just the way I want them, if I'm still trying to make some last-minute tweaks, which I'm still pretty bad about that. I seem to be doing last-minute tweaks right up until the talks usually. But yeah, it's when you actually walk up on stage that for just those first minute or two before you actually go, I feel really awkward because I'm just standing up there and some people are looking at me and some people aren't. Some people are paying attention and I'm just kind of standing there until the person in the back of the room waves and says it's time to start. That's probably the most anxious part for me, is just not knowing what to do at that point. So sometimes I try to talk, sometimes I try to tell people to do the joined in thing, preempt that instead of putting it at the end, fill that space, that awkward time with other things, but it is still does make me a little nervous to get up there and just stand in front of people and not talk.
Yeah, there is an awkward 5 minutes or so. I've often thought about, I don't know, wait in the hall while they're getting ready and then bust in with some dramatic entrance.
Nice.
Be very theatric. It's going to happen someday. I'm going to do it. So you mentioned submitting to a lot of talks and submitting more than one talk, and those are both very good tips for increasing your chances of being selected just from a probability standpoint. But based on the talks that you've given, it sounds like you have some pretty interesting topics. And obviously Sculpin is the topic of a couple of your talks, but some of these other ones sound really interesting, and I'm kind of sad that I've never heard you give them. But how do you come up with the topics for what you're going to speak on?
I think it depends. Sometimes I go through little little bursts of being interested in something. I was just listening to the Code Rabbi No Capes episode, and I think he mentioned something about that where he'll see like a blog post and decide that he wants to find out more about that. So then he might throw together some notes on that and then maybe pitch that as a talk. I wouldn't say I've necessarily done something along those lines, but for any of the talks that have been selected, that is, which I think is actually something that is kind of important. I think that a lot of people will get more. You're more likely to be selected if you know what you're talking about. So, for example, the composer stuff. I did the talk on Embedded Composer because I'd written Embedded Composer. Since I had done an Embedded Composer talk, me giving other composer talks was an easier sell for people because they say, oh yeah, well, Beau did Embedded Composer, and I'm sure he knows Composer, so he can talk about it. Beau wrote Sculpin, I'm sure he can talk about it. There's several other talks that I have been pitching for like the last year and a half that have never been selected. And some of those are things that I haven't really done much. It's hard to see that I've done anything in those areas. So I think it might be a little harder for someone to say, oh yeah, well, clearly this person is going to be able to talk about X if they've never seen me talk about X and I don't have anything at all to show for talking about that topic. So I think it can help if you want to submit talks that you blog about this subject. Join the IRC channel for the project that you want to talk about, or whatever it is that you're interested in doing. Engage with people on Twitter about those topics. People start seeing you talking about the things that you are submitting for. I think it helps definitely your chances of getting selected.
Definitely, I think that is a very, very good tip. And I find personally, I blog about things that I am giving talks about also because how to explain this? When you have to write something, whether you're writing or whether you're speaking, when you have to explain a concept to another person outside of your own head, it really solidifies it for me anyway. So I find blogging is a wonderful avenue to help solidify your knowledge, but also to show that to other people.
Yeah, definitely.
Any chance I can get you to tell us what some of your never before chosen talks are?
Yeah, I could pull up the whole list. I think the big one is, or not the big one, but one of the easier ones to pick off would be, I want to talk about Hawk as an authentication. It's an authentication scheme for APIs. No one's ever picked that, which I always thought was kind of interesting because it's a cross-language scheme. It's based on HTTP. So you have things like Amazon-style API authentication that is very specific to Amazon. It's like that with building like the HMAC authentication stuff, but at a more generic level, so you can embed it into pretty much any HTTP framework. You wouldn't have to do something like use Amazon's library or write your own. You could basically just wrap it around your existing application, and it would just work. For example, I have a stack middleware that does Hawk, so that you could take any Silex API that you've already written that doesn't have any authentication and protect the whole thing with Hawk authentication just by adding the middleware. And you would have to do some additional configuration, but the application itself potentially wouldn't have to change at all. It would just work automatically. So I think it would be a cool topic, but no one's picked that up yet. I think it might be a little too specific. So even though it's something that could be implemented by anybody for any of their APIs, for any of the projects they're working on, it is still probably too niche that, if no one's heard of Hawk authentication, it's probably going to be a hard sell for a conference to dedicate, one of 30 slots just to this one specific type of authentication. So that's an example of a talk that's never been selected.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds interesting, but it also, the reasons why you think it hasn't been accepted kind of makes sense too. So, have you tried giving that talk at like a user group?
I've not given that talk at a user group. Generally, I give the user groups the same list of talks that I give conferences, with very few exceptions, and none of the user groups have been super interested in talk authentication either. One of the other flavors of talks that I would like to give is to do more framework agnostic package building, which a lot of people talk about that now. I was more interested in doing that like a year or two ago. But there's been a couple of people who've kind of stepped up, especially in the Symfony community, who are talking about building your application outside of bundles, for example, in Symfony's in Symfony's style of building things. I would still like to talk about that because I'm still pretty passionate about that. But that's another talk that hasn't been picked up yet.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of talks similar to that recently, being given, and I think that's an awesome thing to do. Big fan of framework agnostic things. So, with speaking, I think we've covered most of that. Do you have any other tips or tricks you want to mention about giving talks?
No. I think one thing that I would like to say about getting rejections is that I found that still doesn't get easier. I've been rejected by over half of the conferences that I've submitted for 2015 so far, and with every single one, I tell myself it's not going to matter, and then with every single one, after I actually get the rejection, I'm like, oh, should I still do the speaking thing? Am I still, like, is anyone ever going to select me again? And it's ridiculous seeing how many talks I did last year and to know how many conferences I didn't get selected for last year. It looks like I got selected for a lot, but there was a lot that I got rejected for as well. For me to even worry about that, like that should not be a concern. And I'll tell people that all the time, that don't worry about it. You know, you had a 30 in 400 chance of getting selected. But every time, even after doing this for almost 2 years now, it's still hard. So I would say just don't give into that and just keep trying. If it's something that you're interested in doing, it's definitely worth pursuing. I found it's been really, really great to get to know more people and get out there and kind of get outside my comfort zone and get up in front of people and talk and learn some new things and kind of push myself to learn more so that I can talk about more things. It's definitely worth it, so don't give up just because you get a rejection, even if you've already given a bunch of talks. So it's still hard to fight that urge to say, maybe I'm not going to do this anymore.
Okay, so always persevere. Very, very good advice, and that's not always easy to do. So the next thing I want to talk about is Sculpin.
Sure.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, Sculpin is amazing. It's what I use to power my blog. It powers DevHuman that I can think of off the top of my head. So in your own words, what is Sculpin, for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah, Sculpin is a static site generator. It takes some sort of markdown, some sort of alternate markup, usually something like Markdown or Textile, for example, and then merges it with some templates to produce static files. These static files can be hosted on any sort of web server. So, for example, GitHub pages, you push static files to your Git repo, and GitHub pages will just render it for you. You can store it on S3. You can store it on any sort of CDN, some lightweight EC2 instance. So yeah, Sculpin's big strength is that it's written in PHP, so theoretically it should be easier for PHP developers to extend and use, and especially with the usage of Twig for the formatting layer. If people want to learn Twig or are really comfortable with Twig and don't want to learn Liquid or one of the other templating frameworks, then jumping on Sculpin can help out quite a bit. I know a lot of Drupal people are jumping to Sculpin to try Twig out, because Drupal 8 is going to be based on Symfony components, and they're going to use Twig as, I think, the default template language for Drupal 8. So people are coming over to Sculpin to just kind of try out Twig and play around with it and get a good feel for it, so that once Drupal 8 actually hits, they can just start working with Twig as if they've been using it for a while. So.
Well, that's cool. I didn't know that about Drupal 8, so that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, Sculpin has a huge Drupal 8 community, and I don't really know them all. I keep finding new people, and they've been using it for a while now. It's like, oh, okay, so how did you hear about this? Oh, I'm a Drupal user, and Drupal's going to use Twig, so I wanted to find something to use Twig, and I found Sculpin. So it's been really interesting to see how it's just grown organically without any help from me because of Drupal, and yeah, so it's been pretty cool to see the community grow like that.
That's pretty awesome. So the first thing when you say static site generator, and you mentioned GitHub Pages, doesn't Jekyll do that?
Yes.
Don't we have a lot of static site generators?
Yeah, I think it was Phil just tweeted something about that recently. Something like building a static site generator is the new building a blog, because there are so many of them coming out now, and it seems like everyone's building some variation of it, either specifically for hosting web pages, or there's several right now geared mainly toward documentation sites, building documentation things. So yeah, Sculpin's definitely not unique, and I spent a lot of time kind of pitching it that way. It's basically just Jekyll, because a lot of people would know what Jekyll was, so I would just say it's Jekyll in PHP, and then I'd have people say, well, isn't that Frozen? Because Frozen was basically Jekyll in PHP. So yeah, it's definitely not a unique concept by any means. There's tons of static site generators available now, and Sculpin is just one that I started working on 2 years ago, I think, 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, so couple questions. Number one is completely self-serving because I just have to know, why Sculpin? Why did you name it after a fish?
I actually have a blog post that Sculpin itself doesn't have a blog yet, but I wrote its first blog post sometime in the last week or two, and I'm going to be posting that. Sculpin is named after a type of fish, and I rather liked seeing them on my honeymoon with my wife. They were pretty cool little fish, and we took our honeymoon in Newport, Oregon. So we went to some tide pools, which I'd never been to a tide pool before, even though I lived in Seattle and lived in California and was always within miles of an ocean. I had never actually gone and seen a tide pool, and just thought that it was just awesome to see all these creatures. So when I was looking for a name for a project, I kind of wanted a mascot of sorts. I really liked Symfony's mascots, especially for their Symfony 1 components. They had all these cute little things for different things, like their dependency injection container had a little thing, and their event thing had a little thing, and Silex has its little rocks. Pimple has its little pimples. Not terribly fond of that one. I don't exactly know what it is. It's like a little circle with little things coming out of it. But anyway, they had these cool little mascots. So I thought it'd be great to have a project that had a mascot. So I thought, what could I use? And I thought, I'll use a fish. Fish would be pretty cool. Maybe I'll use Sculpin. And no one knows what a Sculpin is, probably, unless you live on the ocean. But I thought that would be cool. And my wife is a painter, and she likes sea creatures. So I walked up to her on her desk, and I said, hey, can I get a fish like that for my logo for my new project? And she said, how about that one? It was sitting on her desk, so she hadn't put it on her website or anything yet. So it's Jackson in 2012. Painted in 2012 became the official Sculpin mascot. So he's not actually a Sculpin. He's just a generic fish, but he's fishy enough that I figured it would fit. So
I'm pretty sure that nobody would call you on, hey man, that's not really a Sculpin.
Yep.
But I only know what Sculpin is because of your product and also a fairly tasty beer.
Yep, and that is the other side of it. I constantly get asked, is this where you got the name? Because there's a fish on the Sculpin IPA, and no. So I've told the story enough times that I'm taking some good advice in writing a blog post about it instead of individually responding to each person's question, but you beat me to that. So now you have the story first.
Breaking news right here on No
Yes.
Capes. I have to tell you, I honestly thought that there was some sort of like backroom PHP conspiracy about fish because you have
Mm.
Sculpin, and then obviously you have sturgeon, and so all these PHP things are named about fish, and it's some
Yeah.
Illuminati thing that I
Hmm.
didn't understand. So good to hear that that's not the case.
Yep. Nope.
Um,
No Illuminati.
fish, fish Illuminati. Um, so you're building Sculpin, you're coming out with Sculpin, and you have these people telling you like, isn't this just Jekyll? Isn't this just another one?
Hmm.
So how did you handle that? Was that hard? Was it a struggle?
Yeah, it was. It was actually someone in the composer dev channel that basically told me, go ahead and create it, but don't market it. PHP has enough CMSs. And I kind of took that to heart more than I probably should have. And I'm still pretty new to the PHP community. It was just before I went to that Symphony Live in San Francisco that I sort of started to get involved in Symphony and IRC and starting to interact with other developers. So I was pretty impressionable, I guess you might say. And I really wanted to build this, and I was really excited about it, and I thought it could be pretty cool. But I also went well out of my way to not talk about it and not really promote it. I still wanted to build a web page because I was excited about it, and I still wanted to have a logo because I was excited about it. But I didn't try very hard to push it down people's throats, I guess. I would talk about it when it would come up, in the context of Composer. I would say, hey, embedded Composer, I'm using that in Sculpin, and so I was like, oh, what's that? So then I would tell them about it. So I kind of used that as a way to get people interested in it. So I didn't really start talking about it publicly and really getting out there with it until I gave the talk at Symphony Live. By that point, I think it had been around for like 5 months, 6 months. And then I just decided not to keep it a secret anymore. I wasn't really, still really wasn't going to push it, but I was like, it's not a big deal if someone wants to find it and use it. It's, sure, there's tons of CMSs in PHP, but it can't hurt to just have it listed somewhere, or not even listed, but I don't have to keep it quiet. So pretty much from that point on, people started to find it more regularly, and I started to talk about it more often. It started to come up more often on Twitter. People would ask me questions about my blog or whatever. I was like, oh, it's written in Sculpin, and then I would send them off to the Sculpin website or the Sculpin GitHub repo. But yeah, I did feel like it impacted me quite a bit because I've never created a project like this before where anyone actually used it. I'd created tons of software of my own that no one ever found or anything. So I wasn't sure how many users made it a legit project that anyone should even care about or talk about. So I just was really reserved with it for quite a while. I'm a little less reserved with it now since I'm talking about it at conferences and things. Even submitting a talk on Sculpin, like I wasn't sure I should do that. It's like who cares if I'm going to talk about this project I built? But I've had a couple of people pick it up, so it's definitely getting out there a little bit more. But early on, it did hold me back quite a bit to not know if I should talk about it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, for me at least, self-promotion is something that I really struggle with. I'm not super good at it. And I mean, I can see it being difficult. These talks that you give about Sculpin, are you kind of talking about what it is and how it works, or is it more about like the journey to create it and what you learned in that process?
Yeah, I've actually given both types. I've given a few that were just how you use it, and that talk actually was really self-deprecating, which I thought worked pretty well because a common theme that I have when people come to Sculpin is they think that it has bells and whistles and features that you can do cool stuff with it. but really Sculpin isn't cool. It doesn't do, I'll come straight out and say that Sculpin doesn't do a whole lot for you. It's almost entirely reliant on templates. Um, I think you actually asked me about auto-generating feeds. Like everyone wants Sculpin to auto-generate feeds, and I've never built an auto-generating feed thingy because, from my perspective, it's really easy to copy the Atom template, and you're just generating an XML file instead of HTML. So Sculpin already does that for you by way of Twig. So it doesn't do things like that. You find a template that has something in it, or if you need a new type of file created, you just create a template that does that. You don't need to extend Sculpin to do these things. So the talk was that talk was very self-deprecating. It basically says just use templates. Sculpin's a playground for Twig, and you don't have to actually extend it. And I actually looked back in all my records, and I've probably created 20 or so Sculpin-based sites right now at this point, and I have never extended Sculpin. I've never created a plugin. I've never created an extension. Everything I've ever done with Sculpin, from the most simple sites to the most complicated ones, have just been with templates, just with simple Twig templates. Well, some of the templates are still simple, but I haven't extended it to add extra functionality. I haven't added new tags, I haven't added new functions or anything like that. It's just been really, really simple. That talk went over pretty well. There's been a couple of people who came away from it and were like, oh yeah, that actually helped me quite a bit, because it made me realize that Sculpin was simpler than I thought it was going to be. One of those people was Matt Frost, who he sat in at PHP Tech, which was the first time I got to talk about Sculpin. And afterwards, I asked him how to go, and he said, "Oh yeah, I feel like I'd be pretty prepared to start a Sculpin project." And he had one in mind, which he didn't launch until just this last holiday, like sometime between end of December and early January. He launched Selfies. Have you seen Selfies?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is based on Sculpin. And it was funny because I started to see the tweets when I was with family in a low reception area. So I was kind of seeing these things come in randomly, like, anytime someone I know starts tweeting about starting to use Sculpin, and I can't immediately make myself available to help them if they have problems, I get nervous and anxious and trying to figure out what's going on. But one of his tweets came out basically saying, well, I need to figure out how to do this, and then 10 minutes later he's like, yeah, I think I was overthinking this. This is working really well. And I felt like the talk had prepared him for that. And between seeing the talk about how it's all just about the templates and you don't have to worry too much about Sculpin, it does really basic things and you can do whatever you want to with the templates, and actually implementing it, that had been lost. So I feel like the talk could probably be updated to be less self-deprecating, but overall Sculpin's messaging needs to be geared toward, it's really simple. It's just Twig. It's a playground for Twig to do whatever you want with it. It creates these certain things. Certain files are special, but beyond that, everything is just Twig files, and so there's nothing really complicated. So you don't have to be scared about it. And then the other talk that I did was I put together specifically for Forum PHP. Their theme for this year, or for last year, was first and last in PHP, I think, something along those lines. Basically, PHP can be the go-to language for any project. Just because someone says that you can't do something in PHP doesn't necessarily mean they're right. Because PHP has been growing quite a lot over the last couple of years, and people are really pushing the limits with React PHP. 3 years ago, would anyone have really thought that there would be asynchronous PHP projects that are actually being useful? So I wanted to put together a talk about Sculpin, basically being Sculpin was Jekyll in PHP, was kind of the idea that I was thinking. So I wanted to pitch why I created a command line static site generator in PHP when there weren't really a lot of command line PHP applications. You know, there was PHP Unit was probably the biggest one that I've ever used in the past, and in recent years Composer. And I know there's a bunch of others like Box and Bhat and a couple of the other types of applications, but I think that PHP command line applications are still pretty new. So I thought Sculpin would be a good fit for that theme. So I wanted to give people an idea of what it was like to create Sculpin from scratch and kind of go through the process of, well, you know, that's just Jekyll in PHP. Why don't you use the best tool for the job, which is clearly Jekyll because it's already written. You know, I don't think that's always the case. I think that reinventing the wheel isn't always a bad thing, and especially if you're passionate about it and if you're excited about it, I think that, you know, especially if you're going to learn about it, like learn something out of going through the process, then totally build whatever you want to build. Don't listen to what other people have to say about it. Just build it. You don't have to promote it if you don't want to, but I don't think that you should let other people push you around and make you unhappy about not building something if that's what you really want to do. Which the talk actually turned out to be more about Not Invented Here and kind of how that played out in Sculpin's case, because Sculpin is very much a Not Invented Here project. It is very much writing Jekyll in PHP, because I had come from Jekyll and Octopress and wasn't happy with what I was doing, and I wanted it to be done in PHP.
Okay. We have a question that just came in from Dave Marshall. What are we going to see for Sculpin in 2015?
So for those of you that don't know, Dave Marshall is actually my co-host on that podcast. So thank you, Dave, for asking a question. For as much as I did talking last year and did especially on Sculpin, I really didn't get to do much on Sculpin last year. Partly because I was spending so much time preparing for talks. Most of my free time, if you will, was spent traveling and or preparing for talks, which we didn't talk about that, but that takes a lot of time, putting together talks. So I want to make it an effort to change things for Sculpin in 2015. So I actually have a bunch of things in mind. One of them is that Sculpin is based on Symfony's HTTP kernel currently. I wanted to make Sculpin easily extensible, partly to close the loop on the proof of concept for embedded composer, for people being able to write Sculpin extensions and make it easy that someone could tie into like a dependency injection container. And I had been kind of reinventing the wheel for a little while on my own bundle system, and decided to just go all in on Symfony and say, you know what, I know that this isn't actually an HTTP application, but the bundle system is actually really nice. The way that it ties in with the services, all of that was really good. So I pulled Symfony's HTTP kernel into Sculpin. Along the way, I had spent a lot of time kind of going back and forth with the core Symfony team, trying to get them to consider pulling the HTTP stuff out from the kernel, because the kernel is really cool. This whole concept of an application built of bundles is really neat, and the HTTP stuff I feel like could be bolted onto that. But the way that Symfony 2 is built, it's actually the reverse, that the HTTP kernel exists, and then the kernel, the bundle stuff sort of is built on top of it. In Symfony 3, it sounds like they're going to do that, which would be really, really, really awesome. I'm super excited about that. If there's some way to get the kernel stuff completely decoupled from HTTP itself, then Sculpin is probably going to become a lot more simple. It's going to have a lot less Symfony dependencies, a lot less weird stuff that's there just because Symfony normally is used as an HTTP application. So last I checked, Symfony 3's roadmap says sometime in November of 2015, Symfony 3 is going to be ready. The first release is supposed to be ready. So I'm shooting for Sculpin 3 to be ready to go at that point. So that would be the big milestone for me, would be releasing Sculpin 3. Sculpin is currently Sculpin 2. which there was no one used Sculpin 1. Well, that's not true. Maybe 2 people use Sculpin 1, but it's currently Sculpin version 2. So the big thing for 2015 will be converting to or migrating to Symfony 3. I think I'm going to be upping the minimum PHP dependencies as well, which could be problematic for some users, but hopefully hopefully Sculpin 2 will still continue to work for people. I'm aiming for backward compatibility, that a site generated in Sculpin 2 will continue to work in Sculpin 3, like the same layouts and same directory structures and everything. So I'm hoping that there won't be any problems that people want to keep using Sculpin 2. I want to do a lot of work on the theme support. It was something that I've actually spent a lot of time on and never actually finished it. The code to support themes in Sculpin, like the work in progress, was merged into Sculpin so that people could test it out and try it. What I thought were like individual people that I had specifically said, can you try using themes? The PHP League, for example, was the big push behind that. For a short time, the PHP League site was generated with Sculpin. And Jonathan Radink wanted to have the same template for all of the sites. So he created a template for the PHP League, and then each League website could generate content using the template so they all look the same. Ultimately, the workflow wasn't conducive for people contributing. So I think the League is no longer on Sculpin, which is kind of a bummer. But the theme support was there, and it's been abandoned by me for like 8 months now. However, I've since found that dozens, hundreds, I don't know how many people are actually using Sculpin themes right now and struggling with it because there's no documentation at all. It's pretty cryptic in how it works. And yeah, so I really want to focus on getting that process worked over well. I talked with Eric Barnes and got kind of some feedback. He's done a lot of WordPress templates in the past, so he has an idea of what he would expect from a theme framework. So he gave me a bunch of ideas that I'm hoping to incorporate sometime over the next year as Sculpin 3 comes out, so that hopefully by the end of the year we can start having a nice selection of themes that people can use on their Sculpin-based websites. So I think those are the 3 major things. One other organizational thing is that the bus factor for Sculpin is pretty poor right now. If you don't know what the bus factor is, basically if a bus hits me, Sculpin dies. There's nobody else with organizational access to anything. There's no one who can build the new FARs to deploy. There's a lot of stuff that's just really not very good for the organization. So I have a handful of people that I have reached out to see if they would be interested in joining the Sculpin organization to help. In some cases it's going to be triaging bugs or just helping to make sure that PRs get merged in a timely manner so that we aren't constantly waiting for me to do things. In some cases it might be implementing features or implementing bug fixes. I'm not really sure what sort of responsibilities the team members are going to have yet, but that is something that I'll probably be talking about sometime over the next month or so. And I actually invited you, Kayla, to join the team. So sounds like she's totally on board with that. So there's maybe 4 or 5 other people that I have talked to about this offline. So I won't name anybody's names just yet. But hopefully that'll help make things a little better so that if something weird happens or if I drop off the map for a little while, Sculpin isn't going to go by the wayside. Because people are using it. It's used by a lot of people now. I sort of need to take it more seriously and give it a little more love than I have been. So yeah, that's a really long-winded answer to what's going to happen in Sculpin for 2015.
So in a nutshell, good things are coming.
Yes.
To Sculpin 3 in 2015.
Yep.
Awesome. So lots of people are using Sculpin. We got people from the Drupal community using Sculpin. I use it. You use it. DevHuman uses it. Do you get many complaints about it?
I don't get a lot of complaints. I get people asking why things don't work the way they expect, and a lot of that comes down to documentation. The docs aren't very well loved. That's something that needs to be improved next year as well, or this year. Um, Occasionally, I'll have people who need to move away from Sculpin for some very specific reason. Like the league had to move away because the workflow wasn't as nice as it would have been with Jekyll, because they have everything hosted on GitHub pages. Um, Anyone can contribute to a GitHub page just by editing a file and pushing it, and everything is good to go. If you wanted to have contributors currently on a Sculpin-based site, each contributor would have to run Sculpin generate and output to the production site and then push up to the production site. And it's a little too much to require people to do, especially, if it's a really simple fix that someone wants to do a typo change and to require them to download and get Sculpin instead of just making the change and pushing it up to the Git repo, and then magically a couple minutes later the change is live on the website. I can totally see why that would be a valid reason for someone to have issues. Another one of the early Drupal people that had been using Sculpin, I don't remember what his name is, but his Twitter handle is Mavino, Mavino, I believe, or Mavimo. It's an M and not an N. Yeah, he actually was one of the people who created a theme for Sculpin, which was pretty cool. But in his particular case, there was, I think there were like hundreds of articles, and each article had aliases, because the way that Drupal originally had worked, like you could go to like individual nodes, and so there were like multiple paths to get to the same piece of content. So whenever they generated their files, every single piece of content had to be generated like 6 times to be put in. It wasn't 6 times; it was like 3 or 4 times to be put in all of the different locations that content had to live. And the stats that they gave me was 300 seconds to generate their site, which was massive. So speed improvements could be on the horizon as well, but I'm not exactly sure what that is going to look like. Versus, I can't remember what else they were using. It was something written in Go, and the same site was rendered in some Go static site generator in like under a second, which I don't exactly know how you could render 300 pages in under a second, but apparently it can. So there are some speed penalties that come with using PHP, but that's sort of a given, I would guess. PHP isn't always the fastest language, especially if you're talking about comparing to something like Go or something that's closer to a compiled language that's going to run faster than basically interpreting files, and PHP is just not really well suited for this. So those are probably the only 2 major complaints that I would get. That are just things that don't work for some reason, that takes a little while to figure out, diving through the guts. But I don't know if I would consider those complaints, because they're almost always solved by in some way. So yeah.
Do you ever find it difficult to take feedback on? I mean, Sculpin's pretty, in my mind, visible project. You've got hundreds of people using it. Is it ever scary or hard for you, kind of putting yourself out there?
Yeah. I mean, it's really easy to see another static site generator being written by someone else in the community that I know, and be like, why didn't you help with Sculpin? What was it that you thought that you couldn't have done with Sculpin that made you want to build something else? And it is hard, but I also realized that I did the same thing. I could have helped with Frozen, for example, and I did actually look at Frozen for a short period of time and saw that the architecture was completely foreign to what I wanted, and there were a lot of design decisions that were counter to what I wanted to do with my static site generators. So it made sense for me to build something else rather than try to work with something else. At a certain point, the amount of changes that you want to add to something could, it just makes it not worth it anymore for anybody involved to try to do that. So yeah, it is hard. I actually try to help promote other projects though, if I can. For example, someone was asking about building a documentation site, and someone jumped on and said you could try Sculpin, and did a little mention for at get Sculpin, and I jumped on that, and Sculpin's not really well suited for documentation. It's really not. And there's another project that was just launched recently called Couscous. It's Matthew Napoli, I believe, and it's couscous.io, and it's specifically geared toward building documentation sites. But since it's a static site generator, it also can build a certain subset of landing pages pretty well too, landing pages and other websites. I don't know if it does blogging or anything like that, but I was happy to tell people, what, that might be a better fit for you. There's other things that might be a better fit for people sometimes. Sculpin is a general purpose static site generator that can do blogging and content types, but it doesn't generate like table of contents for documentation yet. And I don't know if it ever will. At least not in Sculpin Core. It might be something that someday someone can build as an extension, but it doesn't make sense. The other project is Paul M. Jones. I think it's DocMark. It's DocMark/DocMark on GitHub. Is another project that's going to try and aim toward, I think it's API documentation built out of Markdown files. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similar sites out there that are similar applications out there that people are building that, it can be difficult to see someone else building something and wonder why they're fracturing the community and why aren't you using this, but really I don't want to force anyone to do anything. It's not my place to say, and everyone needs to do what they enjoy doing. And a lot of the things that even though I want to feel these things, and I obviously do, I also want to make sure that I don't make other people feel the same way I did when I started building Sculpin. So I've tried and maybe have not always succeeded to kind of just be okay with this, be okay with the fact that other people are going to build other things.
Well, I think that's a really good and kind of healthy way to take that. And definitely learning from your own experience as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably, I don't know, seems very grown up of you. Congrats.
Thank you.
So we're almost out of time. We got about 6 minutes left.
Okay.
And I just got an interesting question. So what kind of cool stuff do you see happening in the PHP community, and are there any libraries that you're excited about?
The cool thing that I see in the PHP community, the thing that I am really excited about but don't get to give nearly as much time as I'd love to, would be Pulley. It's, the resource locator that Bernard Weschicks, totally butchering his last name, my bad. And it's very, very cool. It's a it's like a cross-package resource locator that you can configure how to find specific types of resources. So like you could say this composer package ships with templates, and it ships with translation files. And what Pulley lets you do is find those files without having to know where they exist physically on disk. So this works for even like ORM or ODM metadata configuration files, anything along those lines. So basically, as long as it's configured correctly by all of the different packages or the application itself, the application can have locations for certain things. You can request these resources directly, just using the basically you give it like a scheme and a path, and it knows where to find them. So it says, you say, I want templates and I want them to be at this location. It will look in all of the locations, sort of like a class autoloader, looking at all of the different locations where this will be, and the first one it finds, it returns to you the actual path to where it exists on disk. So you don't have to know where it's actually lives. So it's actually very, very cool.
Sorry, my daughter making a cameo. Yes, you can make a sandwich. Go. Out of whatever you want. Sorry about that. She really wanted a sandwich. So this, what's the name of it? I've not heard of this. So
it's Puli, P-U-L-I.
See, I was spelling it like a pulley.
Yeah, Puli. It's named after a type of dog, so I might be mispronouncing it, but it's Puli/Puli on GitHub. So it's very
nice.
cool. It's something, I wrote something called PSR Zero Resource Locator. I wanted to use something similar to this based on auto-loading rules so that it could piggyback on what's already in existence across a whole range of PHP applications and packages. But that was going to take a little bit of work to get through. So Bernard has been working on this project sort of as a similar thing. It sort of started with the same concepts, and he sort of like made an actual real-world implementation of it that I'm hoping people start backing, because it's a really, really cool project.
I just found it on the interwebs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll tweet about it for anyone who is listening and interested, and
cool.
I certainly am. So that is very cool.
Nice.
Any other new things that caught your fancy?
I'm also super excited about PSR 7. I want to see where that goes. It's the HTTP PSR. Long term, I don't exactly know what's going to happen with that, but it would be really great if more PHP frameworks used a common HTTP layer, so that it's easier to make framework agnostic code, so that you can write tools and utilities and applications that can integrate with whatever framework that you're using. So that's pretty cool. That's kind of, it's been going really well the last couple of months, so that's good. So that's something that I'm excited about. I'm hoping that in 2015 we see something with that. Yeah, so those will probably be the big things that I'm excited about right now.
Cool. Sorry, I just tweeted out about the Bully PHP. That's kind of mind-blowing for me, so I definitely am going to check that out.
Cool.
And that's about all the time we have, so.
Cool.
Anything else for the good of the cause?
Yeah, if you're interested in podcasts, check out That Podcast. It's thatpodcast.io. My co-host Dave Marshall and I do that about every 2 to 3 weeks. We push out something new. We haven't done one yet in 2015, but hopefully we'll be recording sometime in the next maybe week or so. Yeah, check that out. You can hear me ramble about a lot of other things, and hear Dave ramble about a bunch of other things, and hear about our. We talk a lot about life as dads and programmers at the same time, and entrepreneurial stuff. So it's kind of a good mix.
Cool. Is there a word for that? Is that dad grammar?
I don't know.
You have programmers, why not?
Yeah.
Dad grammar. Sounds much better.
Dad grammar. Nice. Cool.
All right. Well, definitely check that out. And thank you both for coming on, and anyone who tuned in and listens, and anyone who watches later.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
It was a lot of fun.
Cool. Excellent.
Thank you.